A couple of years ago, right? Remember this ChatGPT moment? It's already 2 years ago. It's like insane, right? We talked about innovation this morning, and it kept coming, and it keeps coming. 2 years ago, I was VP engineering in a company, and this is what happened. This is insane. We need it. We need it in a product. You know, money. Engineering, like, what? How do we do this thing? That was the situation I was in, right? So that's the story I'm going to bring you. It's already a little bit dated in the sense that things move fast in the world. So part of it is moved, but I think it's still valuable to do kind of lessons learned on this. Before I tell you that, we heard a lot about the ML ops and AI ops. My story is specifically on GenAI. It's different, right? Because it's creating stuff. It's less about predicting stuff. So bear that in mind when I tell the story. You know, they're supposed to cut that slide. So the company I was at was a content management system for sales and marketing. Imagine we have a lot of content directly in the sweet spot of GenAI. Let's summarize the meeting. Let's do AI search. Let's kind of create a quiz. That was what we were building. All right. So I have a long history with DevOps. 40 billion industry, amazing. I just think of it as a pipeline, right? Nothing unusual. We build it, we deliver it, we operate it, and then we just make business as usual. I'm not going to talk about using GenAI tools to get better in your SDLC. This talk is about delivering GenAI applications with a DevOps mindset, right? So this is kind of what does it mean to do DevOps practices in there. And first part is build. And we're used to code, data. Now we got a model, right? A prompt, all new things. We didn't know exactly where does it fit in to go there. So let's start with a prompt. We all put stuff in ChatGPT. That's what we call a prompt, a completion, just a text. While writing our first kind of code, we learned that it's rarely that one prompt. It's a series of prompts. We need to kind of give examples to have it behave right, what we want. We have a lot of strategies for prompting. The whole thing on prompt engineering, right? That's what kicked it off. But then it got even more interesting when we said, well, your answer needs to be JSON because we want it to consume. Early models were not that great. So we tried to force the model, we checked that thing, and then we had to retry. So there was a lot of kind of toil that we just learned about instead of just asking a prompt that we need to figure out. OK, luckily, more and more of that information is available, so our folks kind of learn fast. And that kind of brought an interesting thing, and I'll come back to that later. Change a comma, change an enter, change a semicolon gives different results. So very brittle as a result. Not something we've been used to as code. It performs. This is what it does. There's a brittleness to this. So we kind of learned on this. And we also had to switch a lot of models because models were not mature. Speaking of models, a whole landscape kind of emerged. We were early AWS customers. They had Titan. It was the worst LLM ever, but the only one that kind of worked in their environment. So we had to resort to open source model and run our own. Now we have a lot more choice, like Claude and other alternatives to run it. But in our case, we had to kind of do the whole dance and learn as they learned. All right. So Hugging Face been mentioned a few times, but for us, it was the only way to do it. If they're not delivering, we only were able to run our own model. And we got some of the models through kind of a Hugging Face, which was great. The other thing we learned is that the size of the prompt, it's limited. Early ones had 32K of context. Then we moved, eventually the industry moved to 1 million. I think now Gemini has 10 million tokens you can put in. There's a lot of content. But initially, that was a limiting factor because we had to re-ask like smaller prompts over and over again in there. Pricing, we didn't have a budget back then. Nobody had, right? So pricing was important, but I'll come back to that later. It's not that important because it's only one part. But things get cheaper. A model is new. They're probably more expensive. And kind of it's a whole dance of kind of you keeping up with the pricing. Some will claim you need extra hardware. We've never used it. But if that's the case, right, you can cut more costs. And we're all in the cost-cutting economy, so we'll look for those savings there, right? I mentioned the open source versus the closed source. And initially, if you look at kind of the ranking of the models, it took a long time before something entered as an open source model that was kind of getting on par with the commercial ones. So in our story, results were not always that great. But we learned over time things get better, and Mistral is kind of the attempt from Mistral that actually moved the needle. We run things locally because we want to experiment this. Developers want to run this. And it's all nice to get something running on your laptop. It's not the real thing, but it's as good as it gets. Like it's running, like you run your container, but there's a cloud that does the same thing. It's not the same, but it's useful for the developers. We also learned that we need to opt out of all those vendors. I think it took OpenAI about a year to have an opt-out button for not training. So you imagine it was a year that they trained not all the data of us. Same thing happening on all AWS, Azure, right? Be sure to check the opt-out buttons, right? It's not always that clear. And we managed getting kind of the models in, and we talked about code scanning the model and kind of vulnerabilities. But you also have to look inside the model. And one of the things is, on Hugging Face, they have something called the annotated model card. It tells you more about the provenance of the model, what's being trained on. So when you use something, you kind of are looking for this, right? And then eventually, now you have solutions that allow you to train your own LLM or fine-tune your own LLM and kind of take away from that tool. We didn't have that, but it's available right now. And what's nice, the people from Red Hat have a way to kind of make this into the community. No comment here. You all know that this is a good thing. We didn't have it back then, but we're surely using it right now. So we learned that it was not about MLOps. We didn't fine-tune a model. It was all about using a large language model off the shelf to do it. We had to learn about the latency, the context window, and also AWS has a nice way of running a local model and switching it to a hybrid, to a SaaS. So it had multiple solutions there. And then we also looked at the pricing of models. We thought in that model is kind of like a bronze, silver, and gold based on the pricing, based on the capabilities. So we thought of the use cases, which one actually fit the pricing. So a few of the learnings there. Now, the model's all great, but you all want to bring your own information. And we've seen kind of the JFrog integration with the Copilot. That's exactly that. They brought the knowledge of whatever you have on JFrog, they put it inside of the prompt, and kind of then they ask the question, right? So that allows you to use your own information. That was our... people kept telling us you need to fine-tune the model, but again, that's... A lot of folks were in the ML ops region. We were enough just to do RAG, retrieval augmented generation, to kind of get the results. But we had a lot of things, PDFs, Word documents. All of a sudden, we had to parse those things, right? And so new kind of tooling came up to kind of feed that into the system. It was not just that polished JSON file or something that we needed to do. A vector database, a new piece in the infrastructure, to able to search in kind of those documents with meaning, not just keywords, but with meaning, semantic searching. At that time, we used OpenSearch as the one thing that was available on AWS. Now, every database vendor kind of has a vector database extension. So it doesn't matter anymore. Just pick the one that you already have, and that's probably good enough for you. We had RAG as a service. More and more you see the building blocks we had to build. They're just coming up as a service. You can pick the connectors to whatever data source you have. It starts indexing those into your vector database, and you're ready. We all had to cobble this up together. But this is really powerful because we're not in the business of writing all those integrations. So that kind of really helped us. You might think you go to a customer and say, hey, we now have a chatbot. It's great. You can query your data. We want keyword search. It's much more exact. So we saw that our customers had to reframe the queries that they were used to doing, of searching for files, into queries for using a prompt. So we actually wrote a translator that took a keyword search, put it into a prompt, and vice versa, right? So it kind of have to be aware of where your customers are at and what they like to see of your product. It's not because you're offering it that they like it instantly. So we had the luck of having a good kind of data lake. It's all clean. We had the luck of exposing the data as APIs, which solves a lot of the access problems. Otherwise, you're kind of like, who has access to the data? But with the API and the tokens in front of this, it was kind of like a lot easier. So we got around with RAG. Your mileage may vary, but I still feel that if you're trying something, try the RAG pattern first, and then kind of go with the fine-tuning. Then we moved into the world of agents. We're not there yet. So there's a lot of frameworks around agents that kind of promise to do things in even a better way than LLMs. The first one was AutoGen from Microsoft. It's a little bit clunky, to be honest. LangChain had kind of their own way. Crew AI brought it down to coding that you bring a crew together. Hey, I'm a salesperson, I'm a marketing person. What do you think about this document? How should I do things? So they kind of made this concept of kind of crews working together. And then LangGraph kind of brought in the agents a structure. So instead of just saying to an agent, kind of, generate me the summary for the marketing, they say, here's the workflow you should do. First do this, then do that, then do that. So that brings a little bit more of a workflow structure in your agent. So that's really helpful for you to understand what they're doing instead of just running an agent and see what happens, YOLO, right? We learned that to do things with an agent, you need memory. And I think in the opening, there was a lot about BI and analytics. All the things you do on reporting that end up somewhere in your data lake and kind of have a nice report, all of a sudden, they become useful as history, what your customer has been doing. So that's part of the memory when you want the LLM to suggest you things and make it personal, you bring in that data. Unfortunately enough, the solutions are not meant to be for real time of this. They're somewhere in a batch. So we were definitely struggling with that. And then the other thing we struggled with is, what if the user's not there and we want to run an action? We want to run something on behalf of a user, sudo, right? We didn't have this built in our kind of product. So we had to find a way to kind of like run things as a user, delegate the access permissions, have a long-lived token somehow, right? That was all the solutions we could find. Now, you look at solutions like Anon. We kind of tried to solve this solution for doing things on behalf of a user. Like it's a new challenge in the identity management. We wanted to have, when we executed code, we needed to have like a secure sandbox environment per user, right? This is just an example, E2B as one of the companies who do it. They're not using Docker, but they're using Firecracker to kind of isolate the environments. But this is something you'll need to make it more safe in the execution instead of just running it on your servers. So we learned that a lot of the context analytics, we just need this, and we need to get better at this. But we're not sure if we're there yet with the agents. So that's kind of where our story kind of ends on the build. Now, to get all these pieces together, the data, the APIs, we use an orchestration layer. And one of the popular ones is LangChain, Llama Index, that actually brings all those pieces together, right? It's a framework, it's an abstraction that allows you to easily switch in a vector database. That was very helpful in the experimentation. We switch in a model API provider, we switch in the data. So that really helped us as a solution, as an abstraction. OK, that's duplication. Because we were hopping so much on newer models as they were coming out every time, and I explained to you that the prompt, when you just say something, it's so brittle, this became quite costly for us. Like, you think your application is done, you change the model, all of a sudden it starts behaving differently. Right? It's not like that deterministic as we were used to. So we need to get better at this. Luckily, there's now a few tools out there that allow you to kind of upgrade or change your prompts from one prompt for this model to another model. So it's like a refactoring for prompts that we're heading towards. And so we like the frameworks, but there's an abstraction layer, and it's very thin. I'll be honest, after 6 months, every developer hated the framework because they couldn't figure out what the framework abstraction was doing exactly, so they resorted back to their own kind of like APIs directly on the product. I still personally believe in the framework, but it was not good enough. The developer experience at that time was not good enough from the frameworks. All right, we got the build. Delivering an application is actually quite easy. You take the prompt, which is text, you have your library, orchestration, API, data, you version this, you push this in a container, serverless versioning, push this through the pipeline. There's nothing actually that different in there. But the one thing, and I refer to that, changing the prompt, changing the model, how do you test these things? And we all know exact testing, right? ChatGPT, generate me a haiku of 5 lines. That's easy, right? 5 lines, I can count this, I can count the new lines, that's easy. But how do you say, like, generate me a summary? Is this a good summary? How do I define that? That's different. That's text qualities. And we came up kind of with these things, like there's exact testing when you get an input and an output from a model. There's a pattern matching. I'm looking for the word Patrick in a text. Right? That's great. What I can do, if I want to do sentiment analysis, I can use one of the traditional ML models and say, here's a piece of text. What do you think? Is it happy, joyful, structured? That's another way of writing a test for text generation. And then using semantic distance, I can calculate, like, here's a question, here's an answer. How close are they related? Or if I have a good answer and a generated answer, how close are they together? Right? So that's another measurement you can do. It's not an exact thing, but similar to a model, it gives you a score, and you put the threshold on the score. It gets even weirder that you can have an LLM generate something and ask another LLM, what do you think about this one? Right? And you'll see the constant. How do you solve problems in AI? You just use more AI, right? So it's kind of like, it's a constant, right? Or, if you're the lucky one, you're going to ask a human and see for the feedback. We all know that doesn't scale, so that's one of the challenges there. So what was challenging in our CI/CD? Getting GPU access, right? Turns out tremendously hard with existing vendor solutions to get it there. It was slower, and especially when we run these tests for kind of these qualities, the pipelines, the times became longer. We had to resort to kind of like batching in the evening, not having the real-time feedback. So that was kind of challenging for us there. Right. We got it. We tested it. Let's move to production. This stack is only getting more complex, right? I talked about the orchestration, the model. Now we have the vector database. There's new GPUs. There's new frameworks, NVIDIA, and so on. All right. So initially, all the kind of metrics and observability tools that say, oh, yeah, of course we have LLM metrics. Yeah, they just treated it as an API. X amount of tokens per request, right? This is the cost. And they're all good metrics, but there's a lot more, right? How much time does it take for the time to first token? How much do you output? What's the latency of this, right? So these are already a little bit more specific to the LLM. And then I want to do quality monitoring. And I told you, using helper models, other LLMs, kind of those metrics, I want there in there as well, right? I want text quality as well. So you kind of have this continuous monitoring of data quality. And if you're being in ML ops, these are kind of similar to your features. You're monitoring this. But in this case, you're just monitoring what the LLM generated out there and kind of look at those metrics. The annoying thing is they will charge you for this monitoring more than the traditional one because they have to run a GPU to do the quality metrics and all or an LLM. So it becomes more costly. But this is the state of kind of more of the observability there. And then you want to make sure that whatever text is generated doesn't have a jailbreak or a prompt injection. And you want to check your PII that it's not generating strange things. So another thing to monitor of the output. So prompt injections, new products can come up. I must say the newer models are definitely better, but it's not a solved problem. I can tell you that. Right? So you kind of have to make sure that there's other mitigations of reducing the risk of people abusing this and kind of make sure that you have a good alerting strategy when it does. You can mask kind of information and then send it to the LLM, and they get it back and replace it back. So that's a way of dealing with PII and kind of coupling the two. And in many cases, I explain it as a web application firewall. It's a filtering proxy that goes in between. Whatever goes in and out, we control the PII, the metrics, and we kind of control this. Now all of the major vendors are building some kind of a guardrail system that allows you to specify this. And then to reduce the cost, you want to have caching. You don't want to have like the same request generated over and over again, right? I think recently Anthropic enabled like a caching strategy, and everybody was raving because all of a sudden cost goes down, latency goes down. So you got a lot of benefits on this. But in essence, not a lot of vendors actually do the caching, so it's something you have to bring in yourself. And it's not yet the kind of CNCF kind of explosion, but it's just going to evolve, more tools. That's the stage we're at. So doing more of their observability, I told you like one prompt takes the answer, a next prompt. So you do that a few times. So what you want to do is, much like API tracing, you want to have prompt tracing. This is the original question. It did a few prompts, and then it gave the answers. So you want that traceability in. So now a lot of the kind of solutions, I think Datadog has it, Arise, people are building this in for debugging purposes, but just for the LLM, not for the APIs. You want to do A/B testing of prompts. What yields the best results? Well, you can do so much testing you want. The real test, as we all know, is in production with customers. Right, so you can do A/B testing. And it's simply swapping in and out the prompt. It's not that difficult. We understand how that works, but it's really valuable in there. And then we did all this. We saw it was good, but did the user like it? That's the question. Right? Initially, everybody thinks about thumbs up, thumbs down. That's the easy thing of feedback. But imagine a customer giving a thumbs down because he didn't have his coffee in the morning. We all have done that, right? So it's not that valuable. So think of it as other ways to find feedback. What if they copy the text that was generated? That's usually an indicator that they kind of liked it, and you don't need to ask for a thumbs up, thumbs down. If the customer pulls like try again, they definitely didn't like the answer. Right? So that's another way of getting feedback. What we ended up with was even more qualitative feedback in, instead of copying it out and then moving it into an editor, we built the editor in there. We want to end the result. And then all of a sudden, we started seeing the changes that people were putting on the answers that gave a lot more feedback to the people building the prompts. So, we all know the only way to learn and deal with uncertainty is in production, right? And that's the state it is in, and I'm sorry if I shatter some dreams there, but it is not an exact science as we used to do before. Not that production was any of an exact science anyway, but it exactly kind of increases. So we got it into production. We have some way of monitoring the results. We're getting feedback to the people writing the prompts, the products. So we got the typical cycle. One of the things I had to overcome as VP engineering is the data science people were really happy being the stars of the shows. The engineers were really scared. What am I doing? And we heard this before in the keynote. Will it take our jobs? Yes, no. So we really had to kind of help the engineers to learn what it was, what testing meant, what observability meant, how they can write this, and kind of make them learn that. And so that was, a lot of the effort, and a lot. You can do that with Copilot. People see the power. You can do that with hackathons. It's one of the ways to engage your engineers, traditional engineers, to kind of get in there. The other thing we observed was, I talked about data science being the star of the show, but they were never very close to production, right? So data science lived in their own land. Engineering, I'm paraphrasing, lived in their own land. So we kind of had to put something between and remember the wall of confusion of DevOps, kind of like, hey, there's two groups having to work together. And eventually, what we wanted is we would not want to rely on the data science team because they're limited. They have insane kind of capabilities, but they're not the best at thinking about the engineering. So we wanted it to scale out that every engineering team actually was able to do this without the data science team. So that's kind of scaling this up into an organization. And kind of part of the whole infrastructure I've shown you, from caching to proxy to model, that kind of got observed into the platform. So this kind of shift right, we just had our shift left from security. Now we're shifting right, data back to production data science, is something that is called, in a blog article, the rise of the AI engineer. And it is a term that, for good and for worse, people have been using to kind of see this collaboration between, you don't have to be a mathematician, data scientist, you don't have a regular engineer, but something between. You're the AI engineer. Like all titles, it's confusing, but it's what the kind of industry is kind of settling on as a term. So eventually what we did, next to our CloudOps, SecOps, developer experience data platform, we had the AI platform team bootstrapped. And they fitted right in. All of a sudden, they could take all the security knowledge and put it into an AI platform. All of a sudden, they had all the access control, the cloud vendors that brought it in. So we just made it one big platform. And similar to the enablement we do for developers, we had an enablement team kind of do this from within that team to go into the other teams for them to go faster and work on this independently from that data science team. So that's how we scale this out. And I've now learned that this is a pattern a lot of people have been doing on scaling this out into an organization. And we know what a platform team is. We know what an enablement team is. You just have to reframe this. So we provided a platform, we enabled people to use it, and we put the governance on there. A lot of the data was about getting APIs, and when it becomes an API, it just follows the standard security control there. But we also had to learn the trust from the end users. Like, I was sitting in so many calls, what's the platform you're using? Funny enough, if I said, we're not using OpenAI, well, that's fine. So you have to earn that trust of customers coming to you, wanting to you, and you trying to do this in, right? So how do you do that? You kind of tell what you're doing, you're open about this, and how you do this. But we've done the same thing with security in the past. Well, in Europe, we have a little bit more legislation around this, but you're catching up in the US, I would say. So it's definitely one thing that you need to do training around to your engineers, what is allowed, what is not allowed. That's a new kind of thing they need to learn. Another thing, to earn trust, we're not hiding AI. And like you notice the icons, we just put a sparkle on there, right? And it seems like a gimmicky, it's something new. But it indicates that the end user needs to be on their toes, a little bit less trust what they're getting, right? It's an indication that you show that you're not hiding this. The other thing that I wanted to say is that we use the latency of the generation into our advantage. We showed when it was being generated that they knew it was AI, right? So they kind of think about this, that it's not instantly available. All of this, and I'm talking now, over a year and a half, there's a lot of cost. We had to do a lot of this ourselves, right? And we had to innovate. There was no choice. All our competitors needed to be there. We needed to be a leader in the Forrester quadrant and all that stuff, right? Go all in. There was no around us. But now you're in a better position. Tools have matured. There's a lot more options. You can work from there. I keep saying that even though we had part of the budget, a lot of companies are still working on the marketing budget. The boardroom approving, hey, we need this. But will it actually bring value, right? That compensation is a lot where people struggle, where probably you might have to go deeper into the product to get more value, but that's the scary part, because you might have to rethink how your product works. And not a lot of companies have the stomach to do this. But that's where they get the value. It was the same thing with cloud, right? Oh, you have to rethink how you work. But the ones that had adapted to the new way kind of succeeded. If you want to learn more, I have a YouTube channel. It has all my kind of talks. I think we're now at 120, 130 talks. If you still are interested in DevOps, have a look at there. I'll leave you with this quote. Again, I'm learning so much. I haven't been excited for a long time. It's an amazing time to be alive. Thank you very much.